The steam filled the communal showers of the naval base training facility, creating a thick fog that made everything look dreamlike. Sarah Martinez stood under the hot water, letting it wash away the sweat and grime from another brutal day of training. At 28, she was older than most of the recruits, and her body bore the signs of years of intense physical conditioning that the younger trainees couldn't quite understand. Her muscles were defined in ways that spoke of real combat experience, not just gym workouts. Scars marked her arms and back, some from training accidents, others from missions she could never discuss. But to the group of young women sharing the shower facility that evening, Sarah looked like just another recruit trying too hard to fit in. "Look at her," whispered Jessica, a 19-year-old from Texas who had breezed through basic training with natural athletic ability. "She thinks she's so tough with all those muscles." The whisper carried in the echoing tile space, and Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. She had heard worse, much worse, but it never got easier to listen to the judgment of people who had no idea what real service looked like. "I heard she failed out of some special program before coming here," added Maria, soaping her hair with deliberate slowness to extend the conversation. "That's probably why she's so desperate to prove herself." Sarah continued washing, her movements controlled and precise. Every action she took was economical, efficient, habits formed through years of operating in environments where wasted motion could mean death. The other women noticed this too, but interpreted it as arrogance rather than professionalism. "She never talks to anyone," observed Ashley, the youngest of the group at 18. "Acts like she's better than us." The truth was more complicated than any of them could have guessed. Sarah had been specifically instructed to keep a low profile during this assignment. Her commanding officers had made it clear that her presence at the base was part of a larger operation, one that required her to blend in as just another trainee despite her actual rank and experience. She had spent the last 6 years as part of an elite unit that operated in the shadows, conducting missions that would never appear in any public record. Her teammates called her Ghost, not because she was quiet, but because she could disappear into any environment, become anyone she needed to be, and complete objectives that others thought impossible. Now, standing in a shower surrounded by teenagers who thought military service was about proving how tough they were, Sarah felt the weight of her double life. She couldn't tell them that she had rappelled from helicopters into enemy territory. She couldn't explain that the scars on her body came from saving the lives of fellow service members in situations most people couldn't imagine. Maybe she's one of those women who thinks she can do everything a man can do. Jessica continued, her voice gaining confidence as the others laughed. "You know the type, probably can't even handle real combat." The irony was almost painful. Sarah had led mixed-gender teams through some of the most dangerous operations of the past decade. She had earned the respect of battle-hardened veterans who had initially doubted whether any woman could handle their kind of work. Her personnel file, if these women could have seen it, contained commendations from generals and citations for valor that most career military personnel could only dream of receiving. But here in this steamy shower room, she was just another recruit enduring the casual cruelty that seemed to flourish in training environments. "I bet she's never even been in a real fight," Maria said, emboldened by the group dynamic. "Probably just does a lot of push-ups and thinks it makes her special." Sarah's hand stilled for just a moment as she remembered her last mission. 3 months ago, she had spent 2 weeks behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that prevented a terrorist attack on a civilian target. She had been forced to engage in hand-to-hand combat with an opponent who outweighed her by 60 pounds, and she had won because her training and experience had taught her that size meant nothing compared to skill and determination. "She's probably one of those stolen valor types," Ashley said, using a term she had obviously heard without fully understanding its meaning. "You know, like the people who pretend to be heroes, but never actually did anything." The comment stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She had dedicated her entire adult life to serving her country, sacrificing relationships, comfort, and safety in ways these young women couldn't comprehend. The idea that anyone would think she was pretending to be something she wasn't felt like a betrayal of every sacrifice she had made. "Look at how she stands," Jessica said, affecting a mocking tone. "Like she's always ready for action. What's she gonna do? Fight the showerhead?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, the kind that happens when people feel safe in their numbers and certain of their superiority. Sarah turned off her water and began toweling off with the same efficient movements that had drawn their attention in the first place. As she wrapped the towel around herself, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a mirror above the sinks. She saw what the others saw, a woman who looked like she didn't quite belong, whose bearing suggested experiences that seemed out of place in a basic training environment. But she also saw something they couldn't: the weight of responsibility that came with real leadership, the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested in ways most people never would be. "She probably tells everyone she's some kind of special ops," Maria continued, apparently not ready to let the conversation end. "Like she's in the SEALs or something ridiculous like that." The comment hit closer to home than Maria could have known. While Sarah wasn't technically a SEAL, the program was still restricted to men. She had trained alongside SEAL teams and served in joint operations where the distinction between different special operations units became meaningless. She had earned the respect of SEAL commanders who had worked with her, and several had attempted to have her transferred to their units permanently. "Women can't be SEALs anyway," Ashley said with the certainty of someone who had never bothered to research the complexities of military integration. "It's not like she could actually hack it in a real elite unit." Sarah almost smiled at that one. The previous month, she had received a commendation from a SEAL team commander who had specifically requested her participation in a high-risk extraction mission. The letter, locked away in her classified personnel file, praised her exceptional tactical judgment and unwavering performance under extreme stress. But here, in this moment, she was just a target for the insecurities and prejudices of people who were barely beginning to understand what military service actually meant. "I heard she got recycled from some other training program," Jessica said, apparently having an endless supply of rumors to share. "Probably couldn't cut it and had to start over." The truth was that Sarah was at this base on a special assignment that involved evaluating the training protocols and identifying potential security weaknesses. Her recycling was a carefully constructed cover story designed to explain her presence without revealing her actual mission. Several high-ranking officials were concerned about intelligence leaks from the facility, and Sarah's unique background made her the ideal candidate to conduct an undercover investigation. "She thinks she's so mysterious," Maria said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Like she's got some big secret or something." If only they knew, Sarah thought. If only they understood that the woman they were mocking had been entrusted with secrets that could affect national security, had made decisions in the field that had saved countless lives, and had earned recognition from some of the most elite military units in the world. "Probably never even left the country," Ashley added. "Just another wannabe who watches too many action movies." Sarah had to suppress a laugh at that one. Over the past 6 years, she had served in 12 different countries, speaking 4 languages fluently and able to navigate cultural complexities that most diplomats struggled with. She had eaten meals with tribal leaders in Afghanistan, negotiated with black market weapons dealers in Eastern Europe, and conducted surveillance operations in cities most people only saw in movies. The casual dismissal of her experience by people who had never been more than a few hundred miles from their hometown struck her as both insulting and oddly endearing. There was something almost innocent about their assumptions, a reminder of how sheltered most people's lives were from the realities of global conflict and covert operations. "She's probably just here because she couldn't get into the Coast Guard," Jessica said, apparently determined to have the last word in their informal roasting session. As Sarah gathered her toiletries and prepared to leave, she reflected on the strange position she found herself in. These women were her fellow service members, people she was sworn to protect and serve alongside. Their mockery stung, but she also understood that it came from ignorance rather than malice. They were young, inexperienced, and dealing with their own fears about whether they belonged in this environment. In a few days, when her assignment was complete and her real identity was revealed, they would understand how wrong they had been. But for now, she had to continue playing the role of just another recruit, enduring their judgment while secretly working to protect the very institution they were all trying to join. "See you around, mystery woman," Maria called out as Sarah headed for the exit. "Try not to hurt yourself with all that intense training." The laughter followed her out of the shower room, but Sarah's expression remained neutral. She had endured worse humiliation during her actual training, when drill instructors had deliberately tried to break her spirit to see if she had what it took to serve in elite units. The mockery of a few teenagers was nothing compared to the psychological pressure she had faced during selection processes that had broken much stronger people. As she walked down the hallway toward her bunk, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities to observe the facility's operations. Her mission was progressing according to plan, and soon she would have the information her superiors needed to make important decisions about the base's security protocols. But tonight, as she settled into her narrow bunk, surrounded by the sounds of sleeping trainees, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange isolation of her position. She was surrounded by people, but couldn't connect with any of them. She had achieved things most people could never imagine, but couldn't share those accomplishments with anyone. The loneliness of undercover work was something they never talked about in training. The psychological toll of maintaining false identities and suppressing your real personality was a challenge that even the most elite operators struggled with. Sarah had learned to cope with it over the years, but moments like tonight reminded her why so many special operations personnel struggled with relationships and mental health. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah tried not to think about what would happen when her assignment was over and she returned to her regular unit. Would she miss the simplicity of being just another trainee? Would she long for the days when her biggest concern was avoiding the mockery of shower room bullies? The questions would have to wait. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah Martinez, whoever she was supposed to be in this place, would be ready to face them with the same quiet professionalism that had carried her through 6 years of service in the shadows of America's most dangerous operations. But first, she had to get through the night without dreaming about missions she couldn't discuss and accomplishments she couldn't share. In the morning, she would once again become just another recruit trying to prove herself worthy of serving her country, even as she secretly worked to protect the very people who thought she didn't belong there. The next morning brought the familiar chaos of reveille at 0500 hours. Sarah was already awake, having learned years ago to wake up minutes before any alarm. She watched as her bunkmates stumbled through their morning routines, complaining about the early hour and rushing to make formation on time. "God, I hate mornings," Jessica groaned from the bunk across the aisle. "Why does everything have to start so early?" Sarah said nothing as she made her bed with military precision, corners tight enough to bounce a quarter off the blanket. The other women noticed her efficiency, but interpreted it as showing off rather than simple competence born from years of practice. During morning PT, Sarah deliberately held herself back, running at a pace that kept her in the middle of the group rather than leading from the front. Her assignment required her to observe, not to stand out, but it felt strange to intentionally perform below her capabilities. As they completed their 3rd mile, Ashley stumbled slightly and fell behind the group. Without thinking, Sarah slowed her pace to match the younger woman's, offering quiet encouragement as they ran together. "You don't have to slow down for me," Ashley panted, embarrassed at falling behind. "We finished together," Sarah replied simply, echoing the philosophy that had been drilled into her during her earliest training. No one gets left behind, even during a routine morning run. Ashley looked surprised by the gesture, especially given the previous night's shower conversation. For a moment, Sarah thought she might have found a crack in the wall of hostility that surrounded her cover identity. But when they reached the finish line, Jessica was waiting with a smirk. "Ah, look, the mystery woman has a soft spot, trying to make friends with the weakest link." The comment was designed to hurt both Sarah and Ashley, and Sarah could see the younger woman's face flush with embarrassment. It was a cruel dynamic that Sarah had observed in many training environments. People dealing with their own insecurities by attacking others. Ashley's not weak, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying more authority than she had intended to reveal. She's learning. Oh, now you're an expert on who's weak and who's not. Maria joined the conversation, apparently still riding the high from the previous night's group mockery. What makes you qualified to judge anyone else's performance? The question hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah realized she had stepped out of character. Her natural instinct to defend someone being bullied had overridden her need to maintain her cover. She would have to be more careful. Just seems like we're all here for the same reason, Sarah said, forcing her voice back to the neutral tone she had been maintaining. Might as well help each other out. Speak for yourself, Jessica replied. Some of us are here because we actually belong here. Others are just trying to prove something to themselves. The implication was clear, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of being judged by people who had no idea what she had already proven. But she also noticed that Ashley was listening to the exchange with obvious discomfort, caught between her natural gratitude for Sarah's help and her desire to fit in with the group. During the morning training session, they were introduced to basic weapons maintenance. Sarah watched as the instructor demonstrated the disassembly of an M4 carbine, a weapon she could field strip blindfolded after thousands of hours of training and combat use. Now, I want everyone to practice this procedure, the instructor announced. Take your time, be careful, and remember that your weapon is your life in combat situations. Sarah approached the weapon table with calculated hesitation, pretending to be uncertain about the process she had mastered years ago. Around her, the other trainees fumbled with unfamiliar parts and struggled to remember the sequence they had just been shown. Jessica grabbed a weapon and began disassembling it with obvious confidence. "This is easy," she announced loudly. "I've been around guns my whole life." She made it about halfway through the process before getting stuck, unable to figure out how to remove the bolt carrier group. Rather than ask for help, she continued trying to force the mechanism, growing more frustrated with each failed attempt. "Having trouble?" the instructor asked, noticing her struggle. "Just need a second to remember," Jessica replied, her cheeks reddening. "I've got this." Meanwhile, Sarah had quietly completed her disassembly and was beginning the reassembly process. She moved slowly, deliberately, making it look like she was figuring it out as she went along rather than following a routine she had performed thousands of times. Ashley, working at the station next to her, watched Sarah's methodical approach with growing admiration. "How did you know to do that?" she whispered, pointing to a technique Sarah had used to align the bolt. "Just trying different things," Sarah replied, though the truth was that she was following procedures drilled into her by some of the best weapons instructors in the military. "See if this works for you." She showed Ashley the proper technique, careful to present it as experimental rather than expert knowledge. Ashley's face lit up as the mechanism clicked into place properly for the first time. "That's amazing. You're really good at this." The comment was loud enough to attract attention from the other trainees. Jessica, still struggling with her own weapon, shot them both an irritated look. "Some people just get lucky," she muttered, finally giving up and raising her hand for instructor assistance. Maria, who had been having her own difficulties, joined Jessica's resentment. "Must be nice to have beginner's luck," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "Some of us actually have to work at this stuff." Sarah said nothing, but she noticed the instructor watching the group dynamics with professional interest. Drill instructors were trained to observe how recruits handled stress, frustration, and competition, and Sarah could see him making mental notes about who was helping others and who was focused only on themselves. During lunch, Sarah sat alone, as usual, picking at the institutional food while observing the social dynamics of the dining hall. Military training environments were fascinating laboratories for human behavior, and her years of experience had taught her to read the subtle signs of leadership potential and character flaws. Ashley approached her table hesitantly, carrying her own tray. "Mind if I sit here?" Sarah gestured to an empty chair, curious about what the younger woman wanted to discuss. Ashley sat down and picked at her food for a moment before speaking. I wanted to thank you for helping me this morning. With the weapons training, I mean. No problem. We're all learning. But you weren't really learning, were you? Ashley asked quietly. You already knew how to do all that stuff. I could tell by how you moved your hands. Sarah paused, realizing that her careful performance hadn't been as convincing as she had hoped. Ashley might be struggling with the physical demands of training, but she was obviously more observant than the others gave her credit for. What makes you think that? Sarah asked carefully. My dad was a Marine, Ashley explained. I grew up around military people. There's a way they handle equipment, like they've done it a million times before. You have that way. Sarah considered how to respond without breaking her cover. Ashley's father being a Marine changed things. She would have grown up around military culture and might recognize things that the other trainees would miss. Maybe I just have good instincts, Sarah offered. Maybe, Ashley agreed, but her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you here? I mean, really here. Because you don't seem like someone who needs basic training. The question was more perceptive than Sarah had expected. Ashley was clearly intelligent, observant, and had been raised around military culture. She was also struggling with the social dynamics of the training environment, which made her potentially sympathetic to Sarah's situation. Everyone has their own reasons for serving, Sarah said finally. Mine are probably not that different from yours. Except that you seem like you've been serving for a while already, Ashley pressed gently. There's something about how you carry yourself. My dad used to say you can always tell the difference between someone playing soldier and someone who's actually been one. Sarah felt a moment of genuine appreciation for Ashley's insight. In her years of undercover work, she had rarely encountered someone who could read her so accurately while still being essentially powerless to do anything about it. Your dad sounds like a smart man, Sarah said. He was. He died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The simple statement carried a weight that Sarah recognized immediately. Ashley wasn't just another teenager trying to prove herself. She was someone carrying the complex motivations that came with following in the footsteps of a parent who had died in service. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah said quietly. That's why I'm here, really, trying to understand what was so important to him that he was willing to die for it. The honesty of the statement hit Sarah harder than she had expected. She saw something of herself in Ashley's quest for understanding, remembering her own early motivations for military service and how they had evolved through years of actual experience. And have you figured it out yet? Sarah asked. I think so. At least, I'm starting to. It's not about being tough or proving anything to other people. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself. Sarah nodded, impressed by the young woman's insight. Most recruits took much longer to understand that fundamental truth about military service, if they ever understood it at all. The others don't see it that way, Sarah observed. No, they don't. Jessica thinks it's about showing how tough she is. Maria thinks it's about the benefits and job training. They make fun of you because they think you're trying too hard, but I think they're the ones who don't understand what this is really about. Sarah found herself genuinely liking Ashley for the first time since arriving at the base. The young woman had wisdom beyond her years and the kind of character that made good soldiers regardless of their initial physical capabilities. Can I give you some advice? Sarah asked. Please, don't worry about what the others think. Focus on becoming the best soldier you can be. The rest will work itself out. Is that what you're doing? Just focusing on becoming the best soldier you can be. The question was loaded with implications that Sarah couldn't directly address. Ashley clearly suspected that there was more to Sarah's story than appeared on the surface, but she was asking in a way that gave Sarah room to avoid a direct lie. I'm trying to be the best version of myself that I can be, Sarah said carefully. Sometimes it means dealing with people who don't understand your motivations. Like in the showers last night, Sarah was surprised that Ashley brought up the incident directly. Most people would have pretended it hadn't happened or tried to minimize its importance. You heard that. I was there, remember? And I felt terrible about it afterward. I should have said something. Why didn't you? Ashley looked down at her food, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Because I was scared they'd turn on me next. I know that's not a good excuse, but it's the truth. Sarah appreciated the honesty. Fear of social rejection was a powerful motivator, especially in high-stress environments like military training. Ashley's admission showed self-awareness and moral courage, even if she hadn't acted on it in the moment. Fear is normal, Sarah said. What matters is what you do with it. Is that something they taught you in whatever training you did before this? Ashley asked, once again demonstrating her ability to read between the lines. Sarah smiled despite herself. That's something life taught me. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jessica and Maria, who approached the table with obvious curiosity about why Ashley was sitting with the social outcast. Making new friends, Ash? Jessica asked, her tone making it clear that she didn't approve of the choice. Just talking, Ashley replied, but Sarah could hear the tension in her voice. About what? Comparing notes on how tough military life is, Maria added, settling into a chair without being invited. Actually, we were talking about weapons maintenance, Sarah said, deciding to redirect the conversation away from Ashley. I was asking her about some of the techniques her father taught her. It was a skillful deflection that gave Ashley credit while avoiding direct conflict. Sarah had learned over the years that the best way to handle workplace bullies was to redirect their attention while giving their targets an escape route. All right, your dad was military, Jessica said, her tone softening slightly. The mention of Ashley's father's service gave even her pause. Military culture had strong traditions around respecting fallen service members. Yeah, he was. He always said that the technical stuff was important, but the people stuff was what really mattered. What do you mean? Maria asked, apparently genuinely curious for the first time in the conversation. Like how you treat your teammates, whether you help each other or just worry about yourself. The statement hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah could see both Jessica and Maria processing the implicit criticism of their behavior. Ashley had managed to make her point without being directly confrontational, showing more diplomatic skill than Sarah had expected. I guess that makes sense, Jessica said grudgingly. Military units have to work together and all that. Exactly. My dad used to say that the strongest people he served with weren't necessarily the biggest or the fastest. They were the ones who made everyone around them better. Sarah felt a surge of respect for Ashley's father, whoever he had been. That was exactly the kind of leadership philosophy that created effective military units, and it was impressive that he had managed to pass it on to his daughter despite not living to see her join the service. The conversation continued for the rest of lunch, with Ashley skillfully guiding it toward topics that allowed everyone to contribute without getting into conflicts. Sarah found herself playing a supporting role, asking questions that encouraged the others to share their own backgrounds and motivations. By the time they returned to afternoon training, the dynamic between the four women had shifted subtly. There was still tension and unresolved conflict, but Ashley had managed to humanize both Sarah and herself in ways that made casual cruelty more difficult to sustain. As they lined up for the afternoon's exercise, a team-building obstacle course, Sarah reflected on how much she had underestimated Ashley. The young woman had natural leadership abilities that were being overshadowed by her physical struggles and her grief over her father's death. With the right guidance and training, she could become exactly the kind of soldier her father had been. But first, they all had to get through the afternoon's training without anyone getting hurt. The obstacle course was designed to test both individual capabilities and team cooperation, and Sarah could already see the potential for conflicts that might force her to break cover to prevent someone from getting seriously injured. As they approached the first obstacle, Sarah positioned herself where she could observe and assist if necessary, but without taking obvious leadership of the group. Her assignment was to observe and evaluate, not to turn a routine training exercise into a special operations demonstration. The obstacle course stretched across a quarter-mile of carefully designed challenges, each one meant to test different aspects of physical and mental toughness. Sarah had completed similar courses dozens of times, but never while pretending to be a novice. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the training group approached the first obstacle. "All right, listen up," Drill Sergeant Morrison bellowed, his voice carrying across the training field. "This course is designed to test your ability to work as a team while pushing your individual limits. You will complete it as a squad, which means nobody finishes until everybody finishes." Sarah watched the reactions of her fellow trainees. Jessica looked confident, rolling her shoulders and stretching like an athlete preparing for competition. Maria appeared nervous but determined. Ashley looked terrified. "The first team to complete the course gets evening liberty," Morrison continued. "The last team gets extra duty cleaning the mess hall." "Any questions?" Several hands shot up, but Morrison ignored them. "Good. No questions. Line up at the starting line." The first obstacle was a rope climb, 30 feet of thick hemp that swayed in the afternoon breeze. Sarah had climbed hundreds of similar ropes during her training and operational career, but she watched as Jessica immediately appointed herself team leader. "Okay, obviously I should go first since I've got the most upper body strength," Jessica announced, not bothering to consult with anyone else. "Maria, you go second, then Ashley, then—" She paused, looking at Sarah with obvious reluctance. "Then, actually," Ashley said quietly, "maybe we should figure out who's best at climbing before we decide the order." "I'm obviously the best at climbing," Jessica replied dismissively. "I've been doing CrossFit for 2 years." Sarah said nothing, but she noticed Morrison watching their group with particular attention. The drill sergeant was evaluating their leadership dynamics as much as their physical performance. Jessica attacked the rope with confidence, pulling herself up hand over hand with impressive speed. She made it about halfway before her technique began to falter. Instead of using her legs to support her weight, she was relying entirely on her arms, and her grip was starting to fail. "Use your legs," Maria called up encouragingly. "I know what I'm doing," Jessica shouted back, but Sarah could see her struggling. The young woman's pride was preventing her from accepting advice, even when it might save her from falling. Sure enough, Jessica's grip gave out at the 20-foot mark. She slid down the rope rapidly, rope burn visible on her palms as she hit the ground hard. "Damn it," she cursed, shaking her hands in pain. "You okay?" Ashley rushed over, genuinely concerned. "I'm fine," Jessica snapped, though her palms were bleeding slightly. "Just lost my grip for a second." Sarah studied the rope, noting the way it swayed and the condition of the fibers. She had climbed similar ropes in much more challenging conditions, during night operations, in bad weather, while carrying additional equipment. But she needed to make this look difficult. "I'll try next," Maria volunteered, apparently hoping to succeed where Jessica had failed. Maria's attempt was more technically sound than Jessica's, but she lacked the upper body strength to make it more than 15 feet up the rope. She descended slowly, frustrated, but not injured. "Your turn," Jessica said to Ashley, her tone making it clear that she expected the younger woman to fail as well. Ashley approached the rope with obvious fear. She was the smallest member of their group and had struggled with upper body exercises since arriving at the base. Sarah watched as she gripped the rope and began to climb, using proper technique, but lacking the strength to make meaningful progress. After struggling to reach the 10-foot mark, Ashley slid back down, tears of frustration visible in her eyes. "It's okay," Sarah said quietly, moving to Ashley's side. "You did better than you think." "No, I didn't," Ashley whispered. "I can't even make it a quarter of the way up." Sarah glanced around and saw that other teams were making progress on the obstacle. She also noticed Morrison watching their group with growing impatience. If they didn't complete the rope climb soon, they would fall so far behind that catching up would be impossible. "My turn, I guess," Sarah said, approaching the rope. "Don't hurt yourself trying to be a hero," Jessica said sarcastically. "This isn't as easy as it looks." Sarah gripped the rope, feeling the familiar texture of hemp fibers that had become second nature to her over the years. She began climbing with deliberately awkward movements, making it look like she was figuring out the technique as she went. But even while pretending to struggle, her body remembered years of training. She instinctively used her legs to support her weight, wrapped the rope correctly around her feet, and maintained a rhythm that conserved energy while making steady progress. As she climbed higher, Sarah could hear the surprised murmurs of her teammates below. "How is she doing that?" Maria asked. "Beginner's luck," Jessica replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah reached the top of the rope and touched the bell that marked the completion of the obstacle. As she began her descent, she caught sight of Morrison nodding approvingly. The drill sergeant had noticed her technique, and she could see him making mental notes. "Nice job," Ashley said as Sarah reached the ground. "That was amazing. Just got lucky," Sarah replied, but she could see doubt in Jessica's eyes. "How did you know to wrap your feet like that?" Jessica asked suspiciously. "That's not something you just figure out. Watch a YouTube video before coming here," Sarah lied smoothly. "Figured it might come in handy." The explanation seemed to satisfy Maria and Ashley, but Jessica continued to look suspicious. Sarah made a mental note to be more careful about displaying obvious competence. The second obstacle was a series of balance beams at varying heights, requiring both physical coordination and trust between team members. Jessica once again assumed leadership, but her earlier failure had damaged her credibility with the group. "Okay, same order as before," she announced, but her tone was less certain than it had been. "Actually," Ashley said, surprising everyone, "maybe we should think about this differently. What if we helped each other instead of just going one at a time?" "What do you mean?" Maria asked. Ashley pointed to the beams. "Look, they're close enough together that we could support each other. If one person starts a fall, the others could help steady them." Sarah was impressed by Ashley's tactical thinking. The young woman was beginning to understand that effective teamwork was about leveraging everyone's strengths rather than competing for individual recognition. "That's actually not a bad idea," Maria admitted. Jessica looked annoyed that someone else was taking initiative, but she couldn't argue with the logic. "Fine, whatever. Let's just get through this." As they attempted the balance beams, Sarah found herself naturally falling into a support role, positioning herself where she could assist others without drawing attention to her own capabilities. When Maria started to wobble on a particularly narrow beam, Sarah steadied her with a quick, subtle movement that kept her from falling. When Jessica lost her balance on the highest beam, Sarah was there to provide a stable anchor point. When Ashley froze in fear halfway across a gap between beams, Sarah talked her through the movement with calm, professional confidence. "You've got this, Ashley. Just focus on the beam in front of you, not the ground below." "I can't move," Ashley whispered, paralyzed by her fear of heights. "Yes, you can. Look at me, not the ground." Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who had talked people through much more dangerous situations. Ashley responded instinctively to the calm confidence, taking a deep breath and continuing across the beam. As they completed the obstacle, Morrison approached their group. "Interesting technique," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "Where'd you learn to coach people through fear like that?" Sarah felt a moment of panic. She had slipped into instructor mode without thinking about it, using techniques she had learned during advanced leadership training. "Just seemed like the right thing to do," she replied carefully. Morrison said, his expression unreadable. "Well, it worked. Good job, all of you." As the drill sergeant walked away, Sarah noticed him making notes on his clipboard. She was beginning to draw more attention than her cover assignment could handle, but she also couldn't stand by and watch her teammates fail when she had the ability to help them. The third obstacle was a mud crawl under barbed wire, designed to test endurance and mental toughness. The space was narrow, requiring them to low crawl on their bellies through thick mud while staying below razor wire that would cut anyone who raised their head too high. "This is disgusting," Maria said, looking at the muddy pit with obvious revulsion. "It's supposed to be disgusting," Ashley replied, showing more confidence than she had displayed earlier in the day. "It's training." Sarah studied the obstacle with professional interest. She had completed similar crawls in actual combat zones, where the stakes were much higher than training grades. The key was maintaining a low profile while moving efficiently through the mud. "Spread out so we don't kick mud on each other," Sarah suggested. And keep your heads down no matter what. Since when are you giving orders? Jessica asked, her earlier suspicion returning. I'm not giving orders. Just making suggestions. Well, maybe keep your suggestions to yourself, Jessica replied. Some of us don't need advice from someone who's probably never been dirty before in her life. The comment was ironic given that Sarah had spent weeks at a time in much worse conditions during operational deployments. But she said nothing. Instead, she watched as Jessica entered the mud crawl first, determined to prove her leadership. Jessica made it about 20 feet before the combination of mud, exhaustion, and frustration caused her to make a critical error. She raised her head too high, trying to see how much farther she had to go, and caught her hair on the barbed wire. Ow! Help! She cried out suddenly, trapped and panicking. Sarah reacted instinctively, crawling quickly through the mud to reach Jessica's position. She assessed the situation in seconds. Jessica's hair was tangled in the wire, but she wasn't seriously injured. The problem was that her panic was causing her to move in ways that made the entanglement worse. Stop moving, Sarah said firmly. You're making it worse. Get me out of here, Jessica demanded, fear overriding her earlier hostility. Sarah carefully worked to free Jessica's hair from the barbed wire, using techniques she had learned during escape and evasion training. Her movements were precise and efficient, showing familiarity with similar situations. How do you know how to do that? Ashley asked, having crawled over to help. Common sense, Sarah replied, but even she could hear how unconvincing that sounded. As they completed the mud crawl, Sarah noticed that Morrison was watching her with increasing interest. She was drawing too much attention, displaying competencies that were difficult to explain away with beginner's luck or YouTube videos. The fourth obstacle was a team wall climb that required cooperation and trust. The wall was 12 feet high with no handholds, making it impossible for anyone to complete alone. Success required some team members to boost others up, then be pulled up themselves. Okay, Ashley said, taking more initiative than she had shown earlier. We need to think about this strategically. Who's the lightest? Probably you, Maria said. Right. So I should go up first, then help pull the others up. What about me? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. You're probably the strongest, Ashley said, showing her growing understanding of team dynamics. So you should be one of the last to go up, helping boost everyone else. It was good tactical thinking, but it would require Sarah to display strength and technique that might be difficult to explain. However, the alternative was failing the obstacle entirely, which would hurt all of them. Sounds like a plan, Sarah agreed. As they attempted the wall climb, Sarah found herself in the role of primary booster, using her legs and back to lift her teammates high enough to reach the top of the wall. When it came time for her own ascent, she had to rely on the others to pull her up. The problem was that Ashley and Maria lacked the combined strength to lift Sarah's weight, even with Jessica helping. They made several attempts, each one ending with Sarah sliding back down the wall. This isn't working, Jessica panted after the fourth failed attempt. Yes, it is, Ashley said determinedly. We just need better technique. Sarah looked up at her teammates on top of the wall and made a quick decision. Using techniques from her rock climbing training, she found tiny imperfections in the wall surface that provided minimal finger and toe holds. Combined with her teammates' pulling assistance, she was able to muscle her way up the wall with a display of strength and coordination that left everyone speechless. Holy shit, Maria breathed as Sarah reached the top. How did you do that? Adrenaline, Sarah replied, but she knew the excuse was wearing thin. As they descended the other side of the wall, Morrison appeared again. This time, his expression was openly curious. Martinez, he called, using Sarah's cover name. Where'd you learn to climb like that? Rock climbing gym back home, she replied quickly. Must have been a good gym, Morrison said dryly. That was some pretty advanced technique for a beginner. Sarah felt the weight of his scrutiny and realized that her cover was beginning to unravel. Morrison was an experienced drill sergeant who had seen thousands of recruits over the years. He knew the difference between natural talent and professional training. The final obstacle was a rope bridge across a water pit, followed by a sprint to the finish line. By this point, other teams were well ahead of them, but Sarah's group had developed a rhythm of cooperation that was serving them well. As they approached the rope bridge, Ashley took the lead for the first time all day. "I'll go first," she announced, surprising everyone with her newfound confidence. "Are you sure?" Maria asked. "It looks pretty scary." "I'm sure. And when I get across, I'll help guide the rest of you." Sarah watched with approval as Ashley crossed the rope bridge with careful determination. The young woman had overcome her fears through the course of the afternoon, developing into a more confident and capable person than she had been that morning. As the rest of the team crossed the bridge and completed their sprint to the finish line, Sarah reflected on what had been an unexpectedly revealing afternoon. She had learned more about her fellow trainees than weeks of observation had taught her, and unfortunately, they had learned more about her than was compatible with maintaining her cover. As they caught their breath at the finish line, Morrison approached with his clipboard and a thoughtful expression. "Interesting performance today, ladies," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "Martinez, I'd like to see you after dinner for a private conversation." Sarah's heart sank. The request meant that her cover was almost certainly blown, at least with Morrison. The question was whether he would compromise her mission or find a way to work with her real identity. "Yes, drill sergeant," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. As the group walked back toward the barracks, Ashley fell in his step beside Sarah. "That was amazing," she said quietly. "You were like a different person out there." "What do you mean?" "I mean you were leading without making it obvious, helping everyone succeed. My dad used to talk about officers who could do that, make everyone around them better without taking credit for it." Sarah said nothing, but she could feel the weight of Ashley's growing understanding. The young woman was putting together pieces of a puzzle that could complicate Sarah's mission in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Whatever your real story is," Ashley continued, "I just want you to know that you made me a better soldier today, and that matters more than anything else." As they entered the barracks, Sarah realized that her carefully planned undercover assignment was about to become much more complicated. But she also realized that she had found something unexpected, a group of people who, despite their flaws and conflicts, were capable of becoming the kind of soldiers the military needed. The question was whether she would be able to complete her mission before her true identity was revealed to everyone dinner passed in relative silence, with each member of their team lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. Sarah picked at her food while running through possible scenarios for her upcoming conversation with Morrison. Her mission had been to observe and evaluate training protocols while maintaining her cover, but the afternoon's obstacle course had forced her to display capabilities that raised obvious questions. Ashley sat across from her, occasionally glancing up with an expression that suggested she was working through her own set of realizations. Jessica and Maria seemed subdued, perhaps processing the fact that their assumptions about team dynamics had been challenged by the day's events. "Martinez," Morrison's voice cut across the dining hall. "Ready for that conversation?" Sarah nodded and followed the drill sergeant out of the mess hall, noting the curious looks from her teammates. Morrison led her to a small office in the administration building, closing the door behind them. "Have a seat," he said, settling behind a desk covered with training reports and personnel files. Sarah remained standing. "If it's all the same to you, drill sergeant, I'd prefer to stand." Morrison studied her for a long moment. Military bearing, professional posture, tactical awareness, advanced climbing, and coaching techniques. He ticked off items on his fingers. "You want to tell me what's really going on here, Martinez?" Sarah weighed her options. Her cover identity had specific protocols for this situation, but Morrison struck her as the kind of professional who would respect honesty more than elaborate deceptions. "I'm not sure what you mean, drill sergeant." "Cut the crap." Morrison's tone was sharp, but not hostile. "I've been training recruits for 15 years. You move like someone with extensive combat training. You coach like someone who's been through advanced leadership courses. And you problem solve like someone who's seen real operational situations." Sarah maintained her neutral expression, but Internally, she was calculating how much truth she could reveal without compromising her mission. Your personnel file says you're a college graduate with no prior military experience, Morrison continued. But I've watched you for 3 days now, and nothing about your behavior supports that story. Sometimes people adapt quickly to new environments, Sarah offered. Morrison snorted. Lady, I've seen people adapt quickly. This isn't adaptation. This is someone with extensive prior training trying to pretend they're a beginner. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Morrison called for whoever it was to enter, and Sarah was surprised to see Colonel Elizabeth Hayes, the base commander, step into the office. Colonel, Morrison said, standing immediately. Sarah followed suit, her mind racing to understand what was happening. At ease, both of you, Colonel Hayes said, taking a seat across from Morrison's desk. Sergeant Morrison, I understand you have concerns about one of your trainees. Yes, ma'am. Martinez here has been displaying capabilities that don't match her supposed background. Colonel Hayes looked at Sarah with an expression that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Is that right? What kind of capabilities? Morrison consulted his notes. Advanced rope climbing techniques, tactical coaching abilities, professional bearing under stress, and problem-solving skills that suggest extensive military training. Interesting, Colonel Hayes said. Martinez, do you have anything to add to Sergeant Morrison's assessment? Sarah realized that this moment would determine the direction of the rest of her assignment. Colonel Hayes might be testing her cover, or she might be offering an opportunity to come clean about her real mission. I believe I've been performing to the best of my abilities given the training I've received, ma'am. And what training would that be? Colonel Hayes asked. Sarah took a calculated risk. The training I received during my previous assignment, ma'am. Morrison's eyebrows shot up. Previous assignment? Your file says you're a new recruit. Colonel Hayes held up a hand to stop him. Sergeant Morrison, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that does not leave this room. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, Morrison replied, his confusion evident. Martinez is not actually a recruit. She's a special operations officer conducting an evaluation of our training protocols and security procedures. Morrison stared at Sarah with new understanding. Special operations? What unit? That information is classified, Colonel Hayes replied firmly. What you need to know is that Martinez has been observing our training programs to identify potential improvements and security vulnerabilities. How long has this been going on? Morrison asked. 2 weeks, Sarah answered. I was supposed to complete my evaluation without drawing attention to myself. Well, that plan's shot to hell, Morrison said with a rueful laugh. You're about as subtle as a sledgehammer when it comes to hiding your real capabilities. Sarah felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that her cover was blown in a controlled manner. Frustration that she had failed to maintain the deception that was central to her mission. The question now, Colonel Hayes said, is how we proceed. Martinez still has evaluation work to complete, but her cover identity is compromised with you, Sergeant Morrison. What about the other trainees? Morrison asked. They don't know her real identity, Sarah said. At least not officially, though one of them is starting to ask perceptive questions. Ashley Thompson, Morrison said immediately. Military brat. Father was a Marine. She'd recognize professional training when she saw it. Colonel Hayes consulted a file she had brought with her. According to your preliminary reports, Martinez, you've identified several areas of concern with our current training protocols. Yes, ma'am. The emphasis on individual competition over team cooperation is creating dysfunctional group dynamics. I've also observed some hazing behaviors that could escalate if not addressed. Like what happened in the showers 2 nights ago. Morrison asked. Sarah was surprised that he knew about the incident. You heard about that? I hear about everything that happens in my training company, Morrison replied. The question is whether it represents a pattern that needs addressing. It does, Sarah said firmly. The trainees are using social pressure and group mockery to deal with their own insecurities. It's creating an environment where people are afraid to ask for help or admit weakness. Colonel Hayes made notes as Sarah spoke. What do you recommend? Modified team-building exercises that reward cooperation over individual achievement, clear consequences for hazing behavior, and leadership training that emphasizes developing others rather than just personal performance. Makes sense, Morrison said. I've noticed some of the same issues, but I hadn't connected them to broader training philosophy problems. There's something else, Sarah continued. One of the trainees, Ashley Thompson, has natural leadership abilities that are being overlooked because she struggles with some of the physical requirements. With proper mentoring, she could become an excellent leader. And the others? Colonel Hayes asked. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Jessica Martinez has leadership potential, but needs to learn that real strength comes from helping others succeed, not just proving individual superiority. Maria Santos is competent, but lacks confidence. She needs opportunities to succeed in supportive environments. They're all capable of becoming good soldiers if they receive the right guidance. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. So what happens now? Do we pull you out of the training program? That depends on what Colonel Hayes needs from the rest of my evaluation, Sarah replied. Colonel Hayes consulted her file again. We still need your assessment of the night security protocols and the advanced training phases. But your blown cover complicates things. Maybe not as much as you think, Sarah said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. What if we use this situation to test a different training approach? What do you mean? Morrison asked. What if I revealed my real identity to the trainees and used it as a teaching opportunity? Show them what professional military leadership actually looks like. Let them ask questions about real operational experience. Colonel Hayes looked intrigued. That's an interesting idea, but it would completely change the nature of your evaluation. Actually, it might make it more valuable. Instead of just observing existing protocols, I could test whether introducing real-world experience and mentorship into basic training produces better results. Morrison leaned forward with obvious interest. You mean actually train them instead of just evaluating them? Exactly. Use the remaining weeks of their basic training as a laboratory for testing improved methods. The risk, Colonel Hayes said, is that if your real identity becomes known beyond this training company, it could compromise other operations you're involved in. Sarah had already considered that problem. My cover identity for this assignment is completely separate from my operational work, and basic trainees don't have access to classification systems that would allow them to research my background. What about after they graduate and move to their permanent assignments? Morrison asked. By then, they'll understand the importance of operational security. And, frankly, having someone they know personally in special operations could be valuable for recruiting purposes. Colonel Hayes was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of Sarah's proposal. Finally, she spoke. I'm inclined to approve this approach, with strict guidelines about what information can be shared and clear consequences for anyone who violates operational security. When would we make the revelation? Morrison asked. Tomorrow morning, Sarah suggested. During PT formation, in front of the entire training company. Make it a teaching moment about assuming things about people and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. That's going to be quite a shock for your teammates, Morrison said with obvious amusement. Especially for Jessica, Sarah replied. She's been so confident that I don't belong here. Colonel Hayes stood up, indicating that the meeting was concluding. Very well. Tomorrow morning, we'll reveal your true identity and begin the experimental training phase. Sergeant Morrison, you'll work with Martinez to develop modified training protocols that emphasize the principles she's identified. Yes, ma'am, Morrison replied. This is going to be interesting. As they left the administration building, Sarah felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness about the next day's revelation. Her mission had evolved far beyond its original scope, but she believed the new approach had the potential to produce valuable insights about military training effectiveness. Martinez, Morrison said as they walked back toward the barracks. For what it's worth, you've been one hell of an actress. If I hadn't been watching specifically for inconsistencies, you might have pulled off the whole assignment without being detected. Thank you, Drill Sergeant. Though I have to admit, it's been harder than I expected to watch people struggle when I knew I could help them. That's what makes you a good leader, Morrison replied. Real leaders can't stand to see people fail when they have the ability to help them succeed. As Sarah entered the barracks, she found Ashley waiting by her bunk with obvious concern. Is everything okay? Ashley asked quietly. People are saying you got called in for some kind of disciplinary meeting. Everything's fine, Sarah replied. But tomorrow morning is going to be very interesting. What do you mean? Sarah smiled. Let's just say that all of your questions about my background are going to be answered. Ashley looked puzzled, but didn't press for details. As Sarah settled into her bunk for what would be her last night as an anonymous trainee, she reflected on how much her perspective on the mission had changed. What had started as a straightforward evaluation assignment had become an opportunity to directly impact the development of future military leaders. Tomorrow, she would find out whether Jessica, Maria, and Ashley were ready to handle the truth about who she really was and what she had been doing among them. The bigger question was whether she was ready to transition from secret observer to open mentor. Her years in special operations had taught her to work in the shadows, but tomorrow would require her to step into the light and accept the responsibility of visible leadership. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself genuinely excited about the challenges that lay ahead. For the first time in years, she would have the opportunity to teach and develop other people without the constraints of cover identities and classified missions. The morning reveille sounded at 0500 hours as usual, but Sarah woke with a different kind of anticipation than she had felt during her previous weeks at the base. Today, everything would change. As she moved through her morning routine, she noticed Ashley watching her with curious intensity. You seem different this morning, Ashley observed quietly as they made their bunks. How so? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew what Ashley meant. More. I don't know. Like yourself? Maybe? Like you're not trying to hide something anymore. Sarah was impressed by Ashley's perceptiveness. The young woman had developed an ability to read subtle behavioral cues that suggested real potential for intelligence or leadership roles. You'll understand soon enough, Sarah replied. At 0530, the training company assembled for morning formation. Sarah took her usual position in the ranks, but she noticed Drill Sergeant Morrison and Colonel Hayes standing together near the front of the formation, both wearing expressions of anticipation. Company attention, Morrison bellowed, and 200 trainees snapped to rigid posture. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. At ease, everyone. This morning, we're going to begin with an unusual demonstration about the importance of not making assumptions about the people around you. Sarah could see confused looks rippling through the formation. Her teammates were positioned near her, and she could feel their curiosity. Over the past 2 weeks, Colonel Hayes continued, you have all been training alongside someone who is not actually a recruit. Trainee Martinez front and center. Sarah felt every eye in the formation turn to her as she marched to the front of the group. The surprise and confusion on her teammates' faces was obvious, but she kept her expression neutral and professional. Martinez, Colonel Hayes said once Sarah had reached her position, please tell the company who you really are. Sarah turned to face the formation, her bearing automatically shifting to the confident posture of an experienced officer addressing subordinates. My name is Captain Sarah Martinez, United States Navy, assigned to Special Operations Command. For the past 2 weeks, I have been conducting an evaluation of training protocols and security procedures at this facility. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps, murmurs, and shocked expressions rippled through the formation. Sarah could see Jessica's mouth hanging open in disbelief, while Ashley looked like someone who had just had a puzzle piece fall into place. Captain Martinez, Colonel Hayes continued, has served 6 years in special operations, including multiple combat deployments and joint operations with SEAL teams. Her evaluations and recommendations will be used to improve our training programs. Morrison stepped forward. What this demonstrates, people, is that you never know who's standing next to you or what their background might be. The person you dismiss as weak or inexperienced might be the most qualified person in the room. Sarah could see the wheels turning in her teammates' minds as they remembered their conversations from the past 2 weeks. Jessica looked particularly stricken as she apparently recalled her comments about women not being able to handle real combat. "Captain Martinez will be working with us for the remainder of your training cycle," Colonel Hayes announced. "You will have the opportunity to learn from someone with real operational experience. I expect you to take advantage of this opportunity." As the formation was dismissed for morning PT, Sarah found herself surrounded by curious trainees asking questions faster than she could answer them. "Are you really a Navy captain?" someone called out. "Have you been in actual combat?" asked another. "Why were you pretending to be a recruit?" Jessica demanded, pushing through the crowd with a mixture of anger and embarrassment on her face. Sarah held up a hand for quiet. "I'll answer questions during our training sessions. Right now, let's focus on PT." As they began their morning run, Sarah settled into a pace that reflected her actual fitness level rather than the careful mediocrity she had been maintaining. The difference was immediately obvious to everyone around her. "Jesus," Maria panted as she struggled to keep up. "How fast do you actually run?" "Fast enough," Sarah replied, deliberately keeping her pace reasonable for the group. Ashley managed to stay close to Sarah during the run, and her expression showed a mixture of vindication and excitement. "I knew there was something different about you," she said. "My dad always said you could tell real military experience from play acting." After PT, as they headed to the showers, Sarah braced herself for what would likely be an uncomfortable conversation with her former teammates. The irony of returning to the same location where they had mocked her just days earlier was not lost on her. In the shower room, the atmosphere was completely different from their previous encounters. Jessica, Maria, and Ashley clustered around Sarah with expressions ranging from embarrassment to fascination. "I need to apologize," Jessica said immediately, her earlier arrogance replaced by obvious discomfort. "The things I said, I had no idea." "You couldn't have known," Sarah replied evenly. "That was the point of the exercise. But I said terrible things about you. About women in combat, about—" Jessica trailed off, apparently realizing how many of her assumptions had been proven wrong. "You said what you believed based on your limited experience," Sarah said. "Now you have new information. The question is what you do with it." Maria had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke up. "All those times you helped us during training, you were probably holding back, weren't you? You could have done everything so much better." "The goal wasn't to show off," Sarah replied. "It was to observe and to help you develop your own capabilities." Ashley looked thoughtful. "That's why you were always trying to build us up instead of just proving how much better you were. You were thinking like a leader, not like someone trying to prove themselves." "Exactly. Real leadership isn't about being the strongest or fastest person in the room. It's about helping everyone around you become better than they thought they could be." Jessica looked stricken. "God, I've been such an ass. All that stuff about proving I belonged here, trying to show everyone how tough I was." "That's normal," Sarah said gently. "Most people go through a phase like that when they're learning about military culture. The key is recognizing that individual toughness means nothing if you can't work effectively with a team." "So what happens now?" Maria asked. "Do you still train with us, or—" "I'll be working with your entire training company to test some new approaches to military education. You'll get to see what training looks like when it's designed by people with actual operational experience." Over the following days, Sarah's presence transformed the dynamics of their training company in ways that surprised even her. With her real identity revealed, she was able to share stories and insights that gave the trainees a completely different perspective on military service. During weapons training, instead of just learning to disassemble and clean equipment, the trainees heard about the life-or-death importance of weapon maintenance in combat environments. Sarah described situations where a jammed weapon or improperly maintained equipment had meant the difference between mission success and disaster. In Afghanistan, we had a team member whose rifle jammed during a firefight because he hadn't properly cleaned the bolt assembly, Sarah told them during one session. "He was pinned down for 20 minutes while we fought to reach his position. That's 20 minutes of wondering if you're going to die because you cut corners during weapons maintenance." The story had a profound impact on the trainees' attention to detail during subsequent weapons training. Jessica, in particular, seemed determined to prove that she understood the importance of technical proficiency. During physical training, Sarah introduced exercises and techniques that reflected real operational requirements rather than arbitrary fitness standards. PT isn't about punishment or proving how tough you are, she explained. It's about preparing your body for situations where physical failure means mission failure. She taught them how to carry wounded teammates, how to maintain performance while wearing heavy equipment, and how to function effectively after days without sleep. The training was harder than what they had been doing before, but the trainees responded with enthusiasm because they understood its purpose. Most importantly, Sarah worked to change the competitive culture that had been creating conflict within training groups. In real operations, your teammate's success is your success, she told them repeatedly. If someone on your team fails, the entire mission is at risk. That means you have a personal stake in helping everyone around you perform at their best. Ashley flourished under this philosophy, discovering leadership abilities that had been suppressed by the previous emphasis on individual achievement. Jessica struggled more with the transition, but gradually began to understand that her natural competitiveness could be channeled into helping others rather than just proving her own superiority. Maria gained confidence as she realized that her careful, methodical approach to tasks was valued in operational environments where attention to detail could save lives. 3 weeks into the modified training program, Colonel Hayes visited to observe their progress. She watched as Sarah led the company through a complex team exercise that required coordination between multiple small groups. "The difference is remarkable," Colonel Hayes commented to Morrison as they observed the training. "Look at how they communicate with each other, how they solve problems together." Captain Martinez has given them a completely different framework for understanding what military service is about, Morrison replied. Instead of trying to prove they're tough enough to belong, they're focused on becoming effective teammates. During the exercise, Sarah watched as Ashley successfully coordinated a simulated rescue operation, directing her teammates with calm authority that impressed even Sarah. Jessica, meanwhile, had volunteered to be the simulated casualty, demonstrating trust in her teammates' abilities to carry her to safety. "Outstanding work," Sarah told the group as they completed the exercise. "That's exactly how real teams operate under pressure. It feels completely different from when we started," Ashley said. "Like we're actually working together instead of just competing with each other." "That's the difference between training to pass tests and training to save lives," Sarah replied. As their basic training cycle approached its end, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first night in the showers. The women who had mocked her for her mysterious background had become competent team members who understood the real meaning of military service. Jessica had evolved from an arrogant individual performer into someone who took genuine pride in helping others succeed. Maria had gained the confidence to take initiative and make decisions under pressure. Ashley had discovered leadership abilities that would serve her well throughout her military career. During their final week of training, Sarah gathered her original teammates for a private conversation. "I want you to understand something," she told them. "The way you treated me those first few days, that wasn't unusual or particularly wrong. Most people make assumptions about others based on limited information. But we were so wrong about everything," Jessica said, still carrying obvious guilt about her earlier behavior. "You were wrong about my background," Sarah agreed. "But you weren't wrong about what you saw. You saw someone who seemed different, who didn't fit the expected pattern. Your mistake was assuming that different meant inferior. What should we have done differently?" Ashley asked better questions, been curious instead of judgmental, recognized that everyone brings different strengths to a team. Maria nodded thoughtfully. "It's like what you always say about operational teams. Diversity of skills and backgrounds makes the team stronger." "Exactly. The best special operations teams aren't made up of people who are all the same. They're made up of people with different specialties who can complement each other's abilities." As graduation day approached, Sarah realized that her experimental training program had succeeded beyond her expectations. The trainees who would graduate from this cycle were not just physically and technically prepared for military service. They understood the fundamental principles of teamwork and leadership that would make them effective service members throughout their careers. On the final day of basic training, as the company prepared for their graduation ceremony, Jessica approached Sarah with obvious nervousness. "Captain Martinez, I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught us. And I wanted to ask, do you think I have what it takes to be a real leader someday?" Sarah smiled. "Jessica, 3 weeks ago, you thought leadership was about proving you were tougher than everyone else. Today, you spend your free time helping struggling trainees prepare for their final fitness test. What do you think?" "I think I'm starting to understand what real leadership looks like," Jessica replied. "Then, you're already on your way." As Sarah watched the graduation ceremony, she felt a sense of accomplishment that was different from anything she had experienced in her operational career. Instead of completing a mission or gathering intelligence, she had helped shape the future of military service by developing better leaders. Colonel Hayes joined her as the ceremony concluded. "So, what's your final assessment of the experimental program?" "It exceeded expectations," Sarah replied. "These trainees are graduating with a fundamentally different understanding of military service than previous classes. They're prepared to be team members and leaders, not just individual performers." "And what about your own experience? How did you find the transition from operator to instructor?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Challenging, but rewarding. There's something satisfying about developing people instead of just completing missions." "Good, because I have a proposition for you. We're considering establishing a permanent program that integrates experienced operators into basic training as instructors and mentors. Would you be interested in leading that effort?" Sarah looked out at the new graduates, including Ashley, Jessica, and Maria, who were celebrating with their families. These young people would go on to serve in units around the world, carrying with them the lessons about teamwork and leadership they had learned over the past weeks. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I think that's exactly the kind of mission I'm ready for." As the ceremony ended and families dispersed, Ashley approached Sarah one final time. "Captain Martinez, I just wanted you to know that you changed my life. Not just as a soldier, but as a person. You showed me that real strength comes from helping others be their best." Sarah thought back to that first night in the showers, when these same young women had mocked her for being different, for not fitting their expectations of what a military trainee should look like. The transformation had been remarkable, but it had required all of them, Sarah included, to challenge their assumptions about leadership, strength, and what it meant to serve. "You changed my life too, Ashley. All of you did. You reminded me that the most important mission isn't the one that gets you medals or recognition. It's the one that makes the people around you better than they were before." As Sarah watched her former trainees walk away to begin their military careers, she realized that her own career had just taken a direction she had never anticipated. Instead of working in the shadows, she would be helping to shape the next generation of military leaders. The woman who had been mocked in the showers for seeming different had become the catalyst for changing how the military thought about training and leadership. And the steam filled the communal showers at the Naval Base Training Facility, creating a thick fog that made everything look dreamlike. Sarah Martinez stood under the hot water, letting it wash away the sweat and grime from another brutal day of training. At 28, she was older than most of the recruits, and her body bore the signs of years of intense physical conditioning that the younger trainees couldn't quite understand. Her muscles were defined in ways that spoke of real combat experience, not just gym workouts. Scars mark her arms and back, some from training accidents, others from missions she could never discuss. But to the group of young women sharing the shower facility that evening, Sarah looked like just another recruit trying too hard to fit in. "Look at her," whispered Jessica, a 19-year-old from Texas who had breezed through basic training with natural athletic ability. "She thinks she's so tough with all those muscles." The whisper carried in the echoing tile space, and Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. She had heard worse, much worse, but It never got easier to listen to the judgment of people who had no idea what real service looked like. I heard she failed out of some special program before coming here, added Maria, soaping her hair with deliberate slowness to extend the conversation. That's probably why she's so desperate to prove herself. Sarah continued washing, her movements controlled and precise. Every action she took was economical, efficient, habits formed through years of operating in environments where wasted motion could mean death. The other women noticed this too, but interpreted it as arrogance rather than professionalism. She never talks to anyone, observed Ashley, the youngest of the group at 18. Acts like she's better than us. The truth was more complicated than any of them could have guessed. Sarah had been specifically instructed to keep a low profile during this assignment. Her commanding officers had made it clear that her presence at the base was part of a larger operation, one that required her to blend in as just another trainee despite her actual rank and experience. She had spent the last 6 years as part of an elite unit that operated in the shadows, conducting missions that would never appear in any public record. Her teammates called her Ghost, not because she was quiet, but because she could disappear into any environment, become anyone she needed to be, and complete objectives that others thought impossible. Now, standing in a shower surrounded by teenagers who thought military service was about proving how tough they were, Sarah felt the weight of her double life. She couldn't tell them that she had rappelled from helicopters into enemy territory. She couldn't explain that the scars on her body came from saving the lives of fellow service members in situations most people couldn't imagine. Maybe she's one of those women who thinks she can do everything a man can do. Jessica continued, her voice gaining confidence as the others laughed. You know, the type probably can't even handle real combat. The irony was almost painful. Sarah had led mixed-gender teams through some of the most dangerous operations of the past decade. She had earned the respect of battle-hardened veterans who had initially doubted whether any woman could handle their kind of work. Her personnel file, if these women could have seen it, contained commendations from generals and citations for valor that most career military personnel could only dream of receiving. But here, in this steamy shower room, she was just another recruit enduring the casual cruelty that seemed to flourish in training environments. I bet she's never even been in a real fight, Maria said, emboldened by the group dynamic. Probably just does a lot of push-ups and thinks that makes her special. Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment as she remembered her last mission. 3 months ago, she had spent 2 weeks behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that prevented a terrorist attack on a civilian target. She had been forced to engage in hand-to-hand combat with an opponent who outweighed her by 60 pounds, and she had won because her training and experience had taught her that size meant nothing compared to skill and determination. She's probably one of those stolen valor types, Ashley said, using a term she had obviously heard without fully understanding its meaning. You know, like the people who pretend to be heroes, but never actually did anything. The comment stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She had dedicated her entire adult life to serving her country, sacrificing relationships, comfort, and safety in ways these young women couldn't comprehend. The idea that anyone would think she was pretending to be something she wasn't felt like a betrayal of every sacrifice she had made. Look at how she stands, Jessica said, affecting a mocking tone, like she's always ready for action. What's she gonna do, fight the showerhead? The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, the kind that happens when people feel safe in their numbers and certain of their superiority. Sarah turned off her water and began toweling off with the same efficient movements that had drawn their attention in the first place. As she wrapped the towel around herself, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the mirror above the sinks. She saw what the others saw, a woman who looked like she didn't quite belong, whose bearing suggested experiences that seemed out of place in a basic training environment. But she also saw something they couldn't, the weight of responsibility that came with real leadership, the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested in ways most people never would be. She probably tells everyone she's some kind of special ops, Maria continued, apparently not ready to let the conversation end. Like she's in the SEALs or something ridiculous like that. The comment hit closer to home than Maria could have known. While Sarah wasn't technically a SEAL, the program was still restricted to men. She had trained alongside SEAL teams and served in joint operations where the distinction between different special operations units became meaningless. She had earned the respect of SEAL commanders who had worked with her, and several had attempted to have her transferred to their units permanently. Women can't be SEALs anyway, Ashley said with the certainty of someone who had never bothered to research the complexities of military integration. It's not like she could actually hack it in a real elite unit. Sarah almost smiled at that one. The previous month, she had received a commendation from a SEAL team commander who had specifically requested her participation in a high-risk extraction mission. The letter, locked away in her classified personnel file, praised her exceptional tactical judgment and unwavering performance under extreme stress. But here, in this moment, she was just a target for the insecurities and prejudices of people who were barely beginning to understand what military service actually meant. I heard she got recycled from some other training program, Jessica said, apparently having an endless supply of rumors to share. Probably couldn't cut it and had to start over. The truth was that Sarah was at this base on a special assignment that involved evaluating the training protocols and identifying potential security weaknesses. Her recycling was a carefully constructed cover story designed to explain her presence without revealing her actual mission. Several high-ranking officials were concerned about intelligence leaks from the facility, and Sarah's unique background made her the ideal candidate to conduct an undercover investigation. "She thinks she's so mysterious," Maria said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Like she's got some big secret or something." If only they knew, Sarah thought. If only they understood that the woman they were mocking had been entrusted with secrets that could affect national security, had made decisions in the field that had saved countless lives, and had earned recognition from some of the most elite military units in the world. Probably never even left the country, Ashley added. Just another wannabe who watches too many action movies. Sarah had to suppress a laugh at that one. Over the past 6 years, she had served in 12 different countries, speaking 4 languages fluently and able to navigate cultural complexities that most diplomats struggled with. She had eaten meals with tribal leaders in Afghanistan, negotiated with black market weapons dealers in Eastern Europe, and conducted surveillance operations in cities most people only saw in movies. The casual dismissal of her experience by people who had never been more than a few hundred miles from their hometown struck her as both insulting and oddly endearing. There was something almost innocent about their assumptions, a reminder of how sheltered most people's lives were from the realities of global conflict and covert operations. "She's probably just here because she couldn't get into the Coast Guard," Jessica said, apparently determined to have the last word in their informal roasting session. As Sarah gathered her toiletries and prepared to leave, she reflected on the strange position she found herself in. These women were her fellow service members, people she was sworn to protect and serve alongside. Their mockery stung, but she also understood that it came from ignorance rather than malice. They were young, inexperienced, and dealing with their own fears about whether they belonged in this environment. In a few days, when her assignment was complete and her real identity was revealed, they would understand how wrong they had been. But for now, she had to continue playing the role of just another recruit, enduring their judgment while secretly working to protect the very institution they were all trying to join. "See you around, mystery woman," Maria called out as Sarah headed for the exit. "Try not to hurt yourself with all that intense training." The laughter followed her out of the shower room, but Sarah's expression remained neutral. She had endured worse humiliation during her actual training, when drill instructors had deliberately tried to break her spirit to see if she had what it took to serve in elite units. The mockery of a few teenagers was nothing compared to the psychological pressure she had faced during selection processes that had broken much stronger people. As she walked down the hallway toward her bunk, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities to observe the facility's operations. Her mission was progressing according to plan, and soon she would have the information her superiors needed to make important decisions about the base's security protocols. But tonight, as she settled into her narrow bunk, surrounded by the sounds of sleeping trainees, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange isolation of her position. She was surrounded by people, but couldn't connect with any of them. She had achieved things most people could never imagine, but couldn't share those accomplishments with anyone. The loneliness of undercover work was something they never talked about in training. The psychological toll of maintaining false identities and suppressing your real personality was a challenge that even the most elite operators struggled with. Sarah had learned to cope with it over the years, but moments like tonight reminded her why so many special operations personnel struggled with relationships and mental health. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah tried not to think about what would happen when her assignment was over and she returned to her regular unit. Would she miss the simplicity of being just another trainee? Would she long for the days when her biggest concern was avoiding the mockery of shower room bullies? The questions would have to wait. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah Martinez, whoever she was supposed to be in this place, would be ready to face them with the same quiet professionalism that had carried her through 6 years of service in the shadows of America's most dangerous operations. But first, she had to get through the night without dreaming about missions she couldn't discuss and accomplishments she couldn't share. In the morning, she would once again become just another recruit trying to prove herself worthy of serving her country, even as she secretly worked to protect the very people who thought she didn't belong there.